on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Dakota people. Minneapolis sits on an area that's steeped in rich Indigenous history and today is home to Indigenous people from more than 30 different nations. As a city and as a community, we have a responsibility to care for the land on which we live and work and all of its natural surroundings, and to seek and tell the truth about our past and work to repair the harm that has been done. I'm so glad that you've all been willing to come and participate in this. It's a forum on the Minneapolis Green New Deal, and I welcome all the participants. You can see who they are. I don't think I'll list everybody right now because we'll give you some introduction. I want to note that we're going to be recording this, so I hope that's all right with everybody. It seems these are useful sometimes to have a record of and something that we can share with others and have kind of to look back on for ourselves as well. This work is something that we've been working on for a long time. We've actually laid a lot of the groundwork for it already. And maybe we can go to the next slide. Before we talk about the groundwork we've been laid, I think it's important that we realize that while it feels like things might be fine sometimes, if you step back and look at the big picture of things, we are really in a climate crisis. We've seen many recent examples of that. There's an illustration here of something that was going on in Texas not too long ago because of this climate upheaval. The chaos also hits people who are low income, BIPOC communities the hardest. And we're going to see, I think, increasing devastation along coastal lines and in other areas. And of course, those with means to move and relocate and to live in more luxurious conditions are going to be the least impacted. As much as we talk about it and as much as we've done, carbon emissions are still rising, temperatures are still rising, and we really are in a state of emergency and we need to treat it as such. We've spent a lot of time as a city slowly building up our efforts to deal with this. I have to say, just 10 years ago, we hardly had any sustainability office at all, and we weren't really doing much. So we've been able to do a lot and build a lot of infrastructure to get ready, I think, for this Minneapolis Green New Deal. I don't necessarily want to go through all of these things specifically, but we have things to rely on, including a climate action plan, our green zones, goals that we've set, some ordinances, some we'll look at maybe with a little more detail today. And we've got some plans in place, I think, that position us well for being able to coordinate our efforts and target them and even make a bigger difference moving on into the future. Right next, I want to look at a few different examples, and I'm going to let Robin kind of take it over and tee these up as we go, and I'll come back a little bit later.
Thanks, Cam. So our first presenter is Patrick Hamlin with the Minneapolis Health Department. Thanks for being here, Patrick. And here's your first slide.
Okay, great.
Oh, wait, no, I went too far. There we go.
There we go, okay. My name is Patrick Hamlin, Director of Environmental Programs in the Health Department for the City of Minneapolis. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Green Cost Share program today. It's basically a grant program here in Minneapolis focused on climate change. It was championed by Councilmember Gordon here in Minneapolis, and I always like to take the opportunity to thank him for that work in helping us get this program off the ground. It's a win-win focus program to focus on people's real financial challenges to help them overcome those. We started out by working with small businesses, with dry cleaners, auto body shops. We've moved into industrial work and then have focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy in the fight on climate change. It's a program that's built around partnerships, so it can be plugged into and leverage other incentive programs. So with the utility programs, with CenterPoint, Excel, the work that Center for Energy and Environment does, Energy Smart with the Chamber of Commerce, and other programs that are out there. We like to talk about this program in terms of it's a both and solution. So some of the other programs that we're going to talk about today, this program can plug into those and add additional financial benefit to those programs and help leverage resources into Minneapolis to help us in this fight on climate change. It's a flexible tool in terms of government programs. And so we have between a 20% and a 90% match, depending on the project priority, that we match up to $100,000 per project. It has the potential of $175,000 per project, but we just don't have the funding capacity to fund some of those larger projects in that dollar amount. It's equity focused. We talked to, Councilmember Gordon talked about equity. It's targeted in BIPOC communities and people that are in low income situations. And by targeted, I mean that it has higher those projects have higher priority. I talked about that percentage match. They have higher percentage and then higher caps. So it's really trying to put real dollars into those communities. And by doing so, we have in 2021, we had 61% of our applications meet those environmental justice standards. So in an area that you would expect underperformance, with where most government programs have underperformance, we tend to overperform in this in that category. Not to say that there isn't areas that we're always needing to focus on, areas that we can improve. And I think one of those areas for improvement is in green jobs and workforce that we're really focusing the program on now. The program is immediately scalable. So the program is consistently oversubscribed. So we could easily double the amount of, with more funding, we could easily double the amount of projects that we do with this program. And with even a little bit of effort, triple and quadruple the size of it. One of the other benefits that the program has is contractual power. So we're able to work in areas where we might be blocked by ordinances or legislation, where we can go in with funding and work with nonprofits, with small businesses, multifamily property owners, and have contractual agreements where we say, you know, and the 4D program is a naturally occurring affordable housing program where we can have some of those kinds of contractual agreements that if they keep properties affordable for periods of time, that we can provide the dollars and incentives for those programs. So, and then I mentioned that workforce, that's another area that we can start working in and provide contractual power with this program to add requirements with the contracts that we have with different developers or people that are doing projects. So with that, Robin, you want to switch to the next one? So this is just to show, this graph is just to show how the program has kind of grown over a period of years. And we always try to think in terms of scale with the program. Obviously, with everything else going on in the world, we had a minor setback in 2020 in terms of being able to scale. But all things considered, I think we still got a lot of programs in, and you can see that yellow bar, that's the amount of solar projects that we've done. So we actually had a significant number of solar projects that we were able to help out with the Green Cost Share program and add some additional funding to keep that work going here in Minneapolis. And then Robin, if you want to switch to the next one. So this is, I'm going to run through this twice. This is the number of projects, and hopefully is the GIF playing? There it goes. Okay, so this is the projects that we've done each year, and you can see that that same graph that I just showed you, but it's in the geographical layout of where the projects are happening. And so if you can see the projects start to fill in a little bit more in North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis, where we have a lot of those intentional incentives. And then below you can see the financial benefits gained by the people that are taking advantage of these projects and the lifetime energy savings, and then the environmental, either the air pollution reduction or the amount of CO2 that's reduced. So just run through that one more time. And you can just see how we gauge our return on investment with these dollars. And this is a quick overview of the program. We keep all sorts of data in terms of the benefits of the program that I can go into if anyone wants to connect with me offline, but this gives you just a general overview of the Green Cost Share program. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to actually someone who we partner with a lot with this program is Timothy Denherter Thomas.
Yeah, so next we have Timothy Denherter Thomas from Cooperative Energy Futures.
Yeah, thank you. I will try and be really quick here. I was invited to talk a little bit about what's been happening with renewable energy, particularly the distributed and community-based clean energy. I wanted to pull this chart up first, really just to highlight that in the past few years, clean energy in Minnesota has really taken off. And while there has been some like utility-focused investment in solar in particular, um, a huge portion of this has really been because Minnesota has opened up some new options that allow community members, basically anyone across the state, to participate and initiate in clean energy projects that don't require their property ownership or upfront investment. So if you look at that kind of tiny little gray section of this chart, that's all the solar across the state that is on individual residential households and businesses that are directly serving this load. And this large yellow chunk is this new community solar section, which is this opportunity for households, businesses, institutions to participate in renewable energy that is community scaled. So it's a moderately scaled solar that fits well with the grid, achieves some of those economies of scale. That's a really important innovation in terms of opening up access, but if you can click, it's not necessarily particularly accessible. About 85% of community solar so far is commercial, only about 15% is residential. So we have a long ways to go in terms of making the opportunities of clean energy deeply accessible in our community. And I can say even farther from this that within that residential portion, most of the groups that are offering community solar are not serving low-income households or households of color. I represent a clean energy co-op, Cooperative Energy Futures, that has really been focused on that. And we've had some really exciting successes in the last few years. If you can go to the next slide. This is just a picture of an event that we hosted launching a project in North Minneapolis on the Shiloh Temple. It's a Shiloh Temple Community Solar Garden in partnership with the church, a neighboring mosque, a number of other local allies. And it included a workforce component where we had Minneapolis residents, particularly from the north side, helping install the project. We've gone from there into scaling up our work. If you go to the next slide, with some really high profile projects. This is Ramp A in downtown Minneapolis, right next to Target Field. And we see, again, this opportunity for community solar to create scale and make it accessible for low-income households, renters, communities of color, to participate in clean energy really for the first time, again, without having to own property or to have to invest upfront in this. We also really care about making sure that this opportunity is building community wealth, and the cooperative structure that we use is essential for making sure that that is recirculating the wealth from clean energy in our local community. We've been working with partners across the city and actually around the state and around the country, and have really developed kind of a value statement of how we think clean energy should work going forward. You can go to the next slide. And this is really what we think it should be about. And I think as we pursue a Green New Deal, we need to think about how do we design clean energy to really follow these sorts of principles. First of all, community access. How do we make sure everyone in our community can participate, really prioritizing the people who need it most, who are the most impacted? How do we ensure that the community is at the center of creating projects, that the city, community organizations are able to envision and launch projects that benefit their community? How do we really enable the people in Minneapolis to come together and say, this is how we want clean energy to work in our community? The ownership piece. So how do we use cooperative models, municipal models, other models that really ensure that we're building assets and we're building community wealth? And that relates to this final piece, the wealth creation. How do we use this as a channel for job creation, business development, so on and so forth? I've shared a little bit about examples of how we've done this with community solar. I also wanted to mention, kind of building off the green cost share program that Patrick was talking about, that we've seen some really exciting experimentation, and we're involved in some projects to now bring a very similar model that has no upfront cost and net monthly savings for solar for tenants of affordable housing. And we want to see a lot more models like that going forward with the Minneapolis Green New Deal, where people can have access to clean energy without having to own property, without having to spend a bunch of money, so that we can really make clean energy accessible for everyone in our community. I'll leave it there and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Timothy. Next, we've got Alice Madden with Community Power to talk about inclusive financing.
Thanks, Robin. I'm Alice with Community Power. We're an energy democracy organization in Minnesota. And a little bit about inclusive financing, and I think I'll mostly be using inclusive financing, but it's also called tariff-based on-bill financing and pay-as-you-save. And this tool is really meant to close gaps in access to energy efficiency, as similar to if you think about zero waste, conserving energy and using less is incredibly important and a kind of fundamental piece of this Green New Deal idea, or really any way to address climate inequity, so that we are not overbuilding, whether or not it's clean or dirty. The more we build, the more we are paying for things. And so the way to make affordable energy is to make sure that everyone can lower their bills with energy efficiency and we're not overbuilding things. So next slide. Thanks, Robin. And next, let's see if this animation, awesome. So the reality of, solar, but also just focusing in on energy efficiency here is that for the programs that are available, we all pay in, but only some people can access this. And that's both through our energy bills to pay for conservation improvement programs, which are run by the utilities and other program operators, or through our taxes to provide assistance programs. If you pay out of pocket, if you don't access the SIP programs or the assistance programs, you're going to be paying, some large thousands of dollars of, if you're doing really any type of deep energy retrofit, or if you're a landlord and have a big property, that can be tens of thousands of dollars. If you don't have upfront cash, you can take on personal debt for a property that you may or may not be in 6 months, a year, 10 years. And that requires having a good credit score. Or the third option is to apply for assistance, and that's a big if you qualify. So right now it's tied to your social security number, thanks to the Trump administration and some, I think, pieces of state government. And you have to be under 50% area median income, and there's some other ways to qualify, but essentially there's quite a lot of paperwork, and there's a lot of folks who don't meet that, even though they are really significantly cost burdened or just struggling to get by. Next piece. So if you think about all the folks that doesn't cover, we get to this rough amount of significantly less housing per year than it will take to meet our goals, being weatherized. And the city of Minneapolis has a goal to weatherize all homes, apartments, condos, single family homes, all of them by 2025, or 75% by 2025. Next piece. And the foundational problems that we're ignoring here, in terms of like all of these tools that we have right now are important. It's great if people can pay out of pocket. It's great if people want to take out debt, if people can get those assistance programs, but we need tools that actually work for every single person. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to meet our goals. And so some of the fundamental barriers that are being missed here is that we're relying on a financing sector that has a massive racialized wealth divide. So when we have the legacy of redlining, the legacy of people not even being able to have credit history, or people not wanting to take out debt, or to have these predatory interest rates, you have a really significant difference in who can access based on race, but also very classed as well. Then there's a kind of a pretty obvious problem here is if we have a collective problem of climate change and these histories of racism and colonization, and we're relying on personal debt to get us through some of these problems, it cannot be an individual solution to a collective problem. Yes, we want people to individually be able to participate, but relying on people to take out thousands of dollars of debt is not it. And similarly, reliance on public dollars, which are either constantly under threat from this sort of, we're not going to give people handouts type of mentality of our economy, but also the many, many places that those public dollars need to go, they're constantly stretched too thin. So how can we leverage the ability for people to pay what they can, and also for foundations to be able to get in here, and very, very low interest rate capital to come in. And then similarly, if we don't have programs that we're all funding in through taxes or through conservation improvement programs, these things become regressive. And so we can't say, okay, well, we'll have rebates that are for everyone, but only the folks who can pay up front or have a good credit score actually get to access those rebates. So these are all pieces that are really key and where inclusive financing comes in. Next slide, Robin. Thank you. So the basics of how inclusive financing works is that energy auditor would come to your house and say, are there cost-effective improvements here somewhere in your house or apartment? If there are, great, you can participate. And then the utility will add a monthly charge directly onto your utility bill. And the key piece is that the cost effectiveness of that improvement, so installation, maybe a rooftop solar array, or a bigger HVAC, kind of heating and cooling equipment, is that those savings will be greater than the monthly charge. So say your bill was some amount of money you're getting, even after the cost recovery charge, you're still saving money. And this is all on your bill. And the best part is, if I'm in this apartment and I'm only there for 3 months, I get the 3 months of benefits and savings. And then if Robin moves in afterwards, he gets to benefit from those things. And the debt does not follow him because it is not debt, it is a tariff. So that's kind of the overview. There's much more to dig into here, but there's 18 utilities in 8 states that have adopted this, areas of what they're calling persistent poverty, that have been multiplying the number of people who can participate by 10 times. The scale of investment is pretty massive. And that's because we're seeing this is a solution for people who are in drafty homes, who cannot access the 2 ends of the spectrum here of what we consider low income or high income. So I'll stop there and pass it to the next person.
Thanks, Alice. So next we've got Nina Axelson from Evergreen Energy to talk to us about district energy systems. Nina.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Councilmember Gordon, and for everybody who took time out of their evening to be part of this conversation. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just filled with gratitude that people care and are participating in these various ways. I come with a little bit different aspect of this story, because a lot of times people don't know about the infrastructure that is both existing and available to look at how we address climate change, and district energy systems falls into that category. So in many of the cities across the globe that have done a really amazing job on decarbonization, they have this underlying infrastructure, which is mostly on the heating and cooling of systems. So we spend a lot of time talking about electricity and how we are going to power cars of the future and how we are going to continue to power our cities in a resilient manner. But especially for those of us in Minnesota, we really have to be thinking about the heating and cooling aspect of that, which historically has been incredibly natural gas or other fossil fuel dependent. And we are really pivoting into a time when we are talking about what are the alternatives there. So we can't just be talking about one sector, but thinking more holistically about how we provide energy to communities. And that's really where district energy comes to bear. So the basics of it, if you look at the downtown St. Paul system, where you have a central plant that uses 50% renewable biomass, and then you have solar thermal, and you have other heating sources and cooling sources that can come in, and there are pipes running underground that can connect those sources to the buildings downtown. And that, or you look like a city like Copenhagen that has hundreds of buildings that are connected to a district network. And what that allows, and that's what that image on the left is intending to portray, is as we get better and smarter and more thoughtful about the renewable and carbon-free sources that are available, things like heat off of sewer systems, or again, what we're looking at for tower side, which is the energy that is in the aquifer, which is basically a geothermal iteration, that you can plug that into a vision, a tower side, a Minneapolis, a Minnesota, that can move away from fossil fuel dependency. And as we're thinking about, again, equity and access, this is to say, let's connect all these buildings where we can, so they are not fossil fuel dependent. And so that within those apartments, within those business offices, et cetera, they are just receiving access through an infrastructure and a delivery system through that community-based utility that delivers a carbon-free future for them. Next slide, please. So this leads us to the aquifer thermal energy system that is the basis of what we're talking about here in tower side. And so again, very similar to a basic geothermal system, where you are looking at providing heating and cooling through a carbon-free source with a little bit more burden on the electricity side, which is great to think about as we decarbonize the electricity sector. What's important here is that you are removing heat from the buildings in the summer, and you put that into an area of the aquifer that you assume to be storage. So it becomes basically a little thermal battery. And then that heat is available back to the buildings in the winter, so that you are able to take natural gas out of the equation for the most part and have a geothermal based system for the buildings in Towerside or wherever this may be applied. The reason we go to the aquifer is you don't need as many wells as you would need in a traditional geothermal installation. So you get basically a little bit more bang for your buck. So you have some savings, and again, that allows you to invest in more of this infrastructure. And then you, as long as the energy in the aquifer stays put, in other words, the water doesn't drift off with your energy battery, you're able to have that available seasonally to these buildings. So this, I'll put a note in the chat for the article that was just covering the test well drilling on this, where we're testing how fast is the water moving in the aquifer to make sure that this actually meets the standard we would need to implement it. But if it were to move forward, we're talking about a baseline 40% carbon savings for each building that would be connected to a system like this. And that's pretty stellar, thinking you'd have a basic, again, be able to take that natural gas out of the equation for the heating side of things and move to not only a lower carbon equation, but a better public health profile for this system. So I know we're keeping it short, so I'm going to leave it there and post that article in the comments.
Thanks, Nina. Next, we've got Isaac Smith from the Center for Energy and Environment to talk about our energy disclosure work. Isaac.
All right. Thanks, Robin, for having me, and thanks, Councilmember Gordon. So first, I just want to talk about home insulation and air sealing and the opportunities here in Minneapolis. So as we all know, Minneapolis has a really old housing stock from an energy standpoint, that leaves a lot of energy savings opportunity out there. So over 95% of the homes were built before an energy code went into place in 1980. And what this table does is it helps quantify the energy savings opportunity that exists with improving our existing housing stock. So what this table is really outlining is if homes that needed insulation and air sealing in Minneapolis, if all of those homes were to complete those insulation upgrades, these are the resulting energy dollar and carbon savings per year for completing those upgrades. So if every home that needed insulation were to get insulation in Minneapolis, that would result in $7.8 million worth of utility bill savings. So there's a really big opportunity for improving our existing housing stock, adding insulation to homes, and this would be the resulting energy dollar and carbon savings from that. And with insulation, these are cost-effective energy upgrades. They reduce the energy cost for residents. It would reduce the carbon impact of the homes in Minneapolis, and it would also help improve the resiliency of our housing stock during these extreme temperatures and climates that we're starting to experience more and more often. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of awareness around these insulation and air sealing upgrades, around the resources that are available to them. And that's what we worked with Councilmember Gordon and the Minneapolis City Council on a time of sale energy disclosure policy. So if you go to the next slide. So with time of sale energy disclosure, it just launched in 2020. And as I said, we worked to get this passed in 2019. And in the first year, we saw 6,200 homes receive energy scores. So that's around 5 to 6 times the number of homes that traditionally get this information on energy upgrade opportunities and the resources available to them. Typically, there's around 600 to 1,000 energy audits completed in Minneapolis every year. So this policy really helps bring a lot of awareness to the energy savings opportunities in Minneapolis. And in addition to that, it outlines, it gives these homes an energy score. So this helps consumers understand the energy savings opportunity, energy performance differences between homes when they're looking at buying and selling homes in Minneapolis. But in addition to this score, I think the more important part is outlining the recommendations for making these energy savings improvements. So This report actually prioritizes the energy savings opportunities for that home based on the most cost-effective opportunity first. It outlines the typical cost for these upgrades, the utility rebates and resources available to them, the energy bill savings that would result from these upgrades. So we're really looking at using this to generate a lot more awareness and education around home energy upgrades in Minneapolis to really help spur investment and improve this housing stock to get those insulation upgrades completed, kind of our low-hanging fruit that we have here. So in addition to the recommendations for the homeowners, kind of their pathway towards improving that home, we also outline the resources. There's an energy advisor service that we work with the city and the utilities on offering. Again, we outline the utility rebates and the financing available. And really what this is about is helping to spur investment in these energy upgrades, but also just provide education and awareness at a much larger scale that's ever been done before. And then when someone goes to sell their home, if they've invested in insulation in their home before this policy, these were largely unseen upgrades. So you went to look at a home, you don't know if it has wall insulation or attic insulation. So people who have made these investments in their homes that are now saving these energies, these investments weren't really recognized at the time of sale, and this policy helps bring awareness to those energy upgrades. And the last point I want to make to this is this also provides the city with a lot of information on the housing stock and the energy savings opportunities related to that. I view this policy as kind of laying the groundwork that allows the city to get more information, to then design more programs, develop more resources, and target those resources to help improve our existing housing stock in Minneapolis, because we'd like to keep it here, but we'd like to lower its energy burden that's being placed on the city and the climate impacts that it has, and lay out those upgrades and opportunities for people. So that's really what we're trying to do with this energy disclosure policy. That's all I have.
Thanks very much, Isaac. And I'll just note, and maybe we can talk about it during the discussion, the energy disclosure ordinance. Isaac just talked about the half of it that that impacts homes when they're sold by home buyers and home sellers. We also have a component that's about rental units, and that we're working to get implemented this year. But up next, we're going to have Stacy Miller from the Minneapolis Sustainability Office to talk about our clean energy priorities.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Robin and Councilmember Gordon, for inviting me to present on some of what we're working on in the Sustainability Division these days, and how that aligns with the principles behind a Green New Deal, addressing climate and building local wealth, creating jobs, reducing energy costs. All this is what's on our mind in the Sustainability Division. So it's been great to have your support and great to see so many community members here. Like Nina said, it really gives me energy to see that all of you care about this work. The first topic I wanted to offer an overview of is our efforts around the Excel Integrated Resource Plan. And that's the utilities plan for how it's going to deliver electricity to meet our needs over the next 15 years. Minneapolis has some pretty aggressive goals around renewable energy, like 100% by 2030. And there's a local component to that, 10% by 2025, where we want to produce locally. And we're working hard to achieve these, but the truth is a lot of this is out of our control because we rely on the utility to deliver electricity that's clean and affordable. And we also rely on the state, who ultimately makes the decisions about what resources are used. And so over several months, we spent some time with environmental justice leaders and developed comments that spoke to equity as a priority, community ownership potential. And here's the list you see on the slide of some of what we prioritized in those comments, all through an equity lens, trying to seek out those ownership opportunities. You know, Timothy mentioned opportunities for wealth building, that solar presents, and more so if that's right in your community. So we listened to the environmental justice community's priorities. They aligned with city policy and some of what Councilmember Gordon has been championing. So we were able to submit some very detailed comments, and we are waiting at this point to hear back from how this is going to go with the state. These things take months, and so it'll be later this year before we know. But that's very exciting, and we can go to the next slide. Our Better Buildings initiative started with some direction when I was newly with the city in 2019 and asked to lead a city coalition effort to try to get commercial building energy efficiency improved for new construction and deep retrofits. And this also includes multifamily. So that's the picture there. We have a lot of multifamily development in the city and more coming. So this will be meaningful in terms of reducing energy costs, reducing pollution. It makes it easier if we have efficient buildings to deliver on affordability, comfort, and of course, climate goals as well. It's my cat joining me. So we see this as a critical area. We've grown our coalition. We have 14 cities who've signed on and support from architects. And we will see if it gets through this year, but this is one of our legislative priorities. I think I will wrap it up there.
Thanks very much, Stacy. So Cam, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Well, that's great, and that's wonderful, everybody. That sure is a lot of information, and maybe it looks like it's not really all that connected, but it really is. And there's more things that we're working on and more things that we want to do on solutions out there. It's actually pretty exciting because I think in this instance, we kind of know what the problem is, and we know that we don't want fossil fuels. And now we know there's lots of things we can do to help reduce that and replace those. And some of the biggest culprits are actually the heat of our buildings. We are so reliant in our city on natural gas to heat our buildings. So something like that district energy idea can really be significant. Also, we need to do something about transportation right now. Transportation is a big culprit. And so we are certainly trying to work on things like biking, walking, and transit, and how can we promote those? That's something to think about if we have a new Green Deal. How are we actually going to support those efforts? We also have carbon sequestration. There's more use of biochar. We're talking about how we can develop that so that we're actually not releasing so much carbon into the atmosphere, and we're holding it and using it. Resilience in terms of what can we do about our infrastructure and maintain our health so that as the impacts of climate change come, we can respond to those. And actually waste is a piece of this. And all these things are outlined in our climate action plan, and they're recognized, and they may be less of an influence like waste, but it's a significant influence. And there's what we can do. And sometimes we kind of fool ourselves in thinking like something like a garbage burner is actually a renewable energy, and maybe we could just do that. And that's district energy, right? Well, no, it's not really renewable, and we need to reduce our waste because it actually takes energy to burn that and use that up, and then it creates more waste in terms of that ash. So there's other things that we're working on and other things that we're doing, and I want that to be in people's minds as well. But I'm really excited about what we could potentially do with a Minneapolis Green New Deal, and I think we really have some ingredients that could help us. I think there's two sides of this that I want people to think about. Is these are all great things to do, but it actually does take resources and money to do them. Even if we maybe end up saving on our energy bills, but how are we actually going to do these things? The green cost share that we talked about, that was an investment that the city made, and we were able to make it because we as a city have some control over some revenues that come in terms of pollution. We can charge a fee to polluters. This is kind of an exciting thing to imagine as we look at climate change and we think about what a big global problem it is. And we go, I wish the federal government would do something. Oh, if only the state would change these things and let us do more, we could really do something. Well, I think we've carved a path so that we can actually lead as a city and take some initiatives here. We've got some autonomy, we can build some resources, and we can really make a difference. And that's not how it is with every problem that we're facing. But it's something that we can do here and now. And it's not going to be without controversy, and it's going to be difficult, and there's going to be challenges, but we can do it. And one of it is the reasons we can is because we can get some revenue coming in. There's the polluter's fee, and sometimes that goes away. Like as the dry cleaners all clean up their act, we really can't collect the same kind of fees we were, but we're dealing with pollution. And I think we're ready to admit that fossil fuel is pollution in and of itself. I don't know if we're ready actually to start saying we get to charge that fee on gas stations in our city, but maybe we could. They're certainly a source of pollution. They're certainly putting a cost on us as a city and as a society as that carbon gets emitted in there. So we have identified a social cost of carbon, and we just basically adopted the states. And that's something to help us understand really what are the true costs over time that we're going to have to pay for because of this. And they are significant. We also, I want to just lift up that when we were renegotiating our utility franchise this last time, we separated the franchise fee from our ordinance. And now we have been able to raise that ourselves. And that's actually another thing that's helped us with the green cost share and to pay for some other things is we increased it a little bit and said we're going to set aside some funds now for paying for green and sustainable efforts. We need to start thinking about maybe we have to charge a higher fee when the fuels are dirtier and causing more damage. And that's one thing I want us to start thinking about and imagine. I mean, maybe we can't really do a carbon tax, but maybe we could admit to ourselves that it's actually costing us a lot more as a city and as a society to deal with natural gas burning in our city. And maybe that fee actually needs to be a little more because we need to take bigger actions to deal with that to prevent the harms that are coming our way. And maybe we can reward an electric company that ends up moving away from all of that coal, if they ever do, and maybe all of that natural gas so that it's cleaner energy and say, we're not actually going to charge as a high franchise fee because obviously we calculated a social cost or true cost of carbon. And so that's not as expensive as it was. So those give us some real opportunities so that we can start to bring in some revenues and see if we can't have more support we can give. Quite honestly, when we talk about inclusive financing, and it's a great funding mechanism, but in order to make those improvements on those homes, to put solar up there on those apartment buildings, to do that insulation, it takes an upfront capital investment. So somebody needs to be willing to take that risk, and somebody needs to have some of those resources so that they can take that risk and make that investment. And why wouldn't it be a city? I mean, why wouldn't we want to have funds so that we could do that? And then we could lower the city's carbon footprint, and we could reduce energy like that and also help everybody save money on their bills. I think that's something that we should do. And look at district energy in Towerside. Putting in some infrastructure like that is expensive. Building that system costs a lot of money. Well, why shouldn't that be something that the city would want to invest in and maybe even own? What if we could come up with a model of district energy systems that worked in Towerside? Maybe it could work in the Upper Harbor Terminal. Maybe it could work at Kmart. And instead of relying on private industry that's going to be making profits off of that, why can't we let a cooperative, maybe it's we're all members because we live in Minneapolis, or maybe it's just our district energy system that the city of Minneapolis owns itself so that we can make sure that it's preserved and maintained and effective into the future. I think that's something we need to think about. And why can't we do that? I don't think there's any reason except that maybe we don't have the will and we're concerned about the costs. And that's not making any big commitment, Nina, that we're going to be able to actually own anything and want to own anything that is Evergreen might want to manage in Towerside. But I just want to strike people's imagination and think about if we had those resources. And then what kind of jobs might there be for actually building those? And what if Minneapolis residents could get that? And while they're doing that, other people could get trained into how to do that kind of work. I mean, a real key with all of this is going to be how we can use a racial equity lens to do this, and kind of an economic justice lens. We've also laid some groundwork with that with the green zones. I mean, we've already looked at parts of our city, and we have ways of measuring where people have suffered the most from environmental injustice, and we can bring resources there. And I have to say, Patrick and his team has done a great job doing that. I think Timothy has done a great job in terms of community solar and who it gets marketed to, and how do we do that, and how do we do that outreach. And I think that those four key values of community access, community creation, community ownership, and community wealth are so critical to any Green New Deal. So I really appreciate the work that went into those, and they have to be embedded in everything that we do. But there's a way I think that we can do this, and we can make it work. I think we also have to make sure that as we are raising fees on some of these big energy users, if we were to say raise the franchise fee, we have to bring those resources back. In fact, to as many as we can, to say, but your energy bill is going to be going down. Not only are you going to be helping us defray future costs because of climate change and carbon pollution, but you're going to see immediate benefits, and you're going to see your energy costs going down, which is even part of the green cost share, which is called green cost share, because in that instance, we expect people to contribute themselves to help with that. And we're sharing some of the costs with them, and they see some of those benefits. So I'd be interested and want to hear what people think about this, and have questions and comments. I know that these kinds of things that I've just said could be scary for some people, and they could feel threatened, maybe that their livelihood or their industry or business is going to be threatened. So I think we really need to have some conversations about it and see where we're going from here. And I'm not sure, Robin, if Charles wanted to speak still before we open it up.
Yeah, I can say a couple words. Hi, this is Charles from Plum London Jr. I'm joining on the phone here. I'm from the Sierra Club North Star chapter, located in St. Paul, as well as the BIPOC Environmental Justice Table. Yeah, and just like first off, thank you for having me tonight. I think I've really enjoyed all the presentations, and especially the way that it has been framed. I think it was very important to hear the statement early on that, you know, we're not looking ahead towards a climate crisis. We're really in the midst of it. It's something that's generationally embedded into our communities, and folks are dealing with the implications of environmental racism. And so when I think of the Green New Deal, I can't think of it without the aspect of environmental justice being center and really informing some of the solutions that we're thinking of. Because just for example, like when I think of environment, I think of my physical manifestation of culture in a way. So my surroundings, my borders, what informs those borders, and what's located within their limits. And just to speak to like how we can approach the Green New Deal is like, I think about like, what does it mean to live like a day in my life? Or what does it mean to live a day in the life of a BIPOC community member? You know, we have folks that are living in food deserts. We have folks that are dealing with displacement, dealing with surveillance, over policing. And these are really, you know, real aspects of interacting within our environment. So how can, within building out a Green New Deal for our city, we can address those issues as well? And I think particularly with the aspect of innovation and technology-based solutions, there's always an aspect that, you know, has to relate back to how are we holistically shaping culture as well alongside it. You know, we see often across the country the introduction of more green infrastructure leading to displacement and green gentrification. So what are we doing in tandem with some of these really revolutionary ideas to help protect and not displace our BIPOC communities? You know, if we're going to, you know, quote unquote, clean up our city and create a brighter future, that should be a future that all Minnesotans are able to enjoy, especially the folks that have, you know, suffered from the effects of environmental racism for decades and generations. Yeah, and so I think I was very happy to hear a lot of the folks speak on how exactly they've shaped out some of their solutions with the equity lens in mind. And one thing that I just want to stress and always think it's important to keep in mind is like we're not only trying to mitigate the effects of climate change, but also to address like reconciliation and reparations within those solutions as well. I think I was very, very, very excited to see Councilmember Gordon, your statement around removing the renewable energy credits from the HERC, because that's something, you know, I've been living in Minneapolis for, you know, a little under a decade, but that's something that's always been in the purview as like a, you know, a solution to our problem as a two bird, one stone sort of thing of how do we deal with the waste stream while also producing clean energy. And I've always had an issue with that because, you know, interacting with my friends and neighbors, that's something that is actively poisoning our BIPOC communities, our predominantly Black communities in North Minneapolis. So I think that that's, for me, a great step towards, you know, shutting down the HERC and, you know, taking on the task of some reconciliation when it comes to Black folks that are living in Minneapolis. And yeah, just encouraging us to continue to lean into those aspects of the conversation as well. But thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Now, I think we're ready to open up for comments or questions, and I'm going to let you kind of keep the stack, Robin.
Yeah, so if folks want to just put your name or chat or something like that in the chat, I can keep the stack. And should I get rid of the presentation so we can look at each other?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. Here we all are. Hi, everybody. So I don't have anybody in the chat yet, but
so Katie asked a question in the chat, and I think the answer is that we don't. So she asked, do you know all households in each zip code that have solar and wind? And I don't. And I'm not sure if the city has necessarily any record of that. I'm sure they pulled a permit to install it, but if you have wind, maybe you've signed up for it from somewhere else, or you're a member of a community solar project anywhere else. Does anybody know if we have that kind of information? It would be a fun thing to track and watch as it goes up and skyrockets in the near future.
Councilmember Gordon, we wish we had that information, but there are privacy concerns around sharing it. From the utilities perspective, they're not allowed to share it. And so you're right, though, that we would have records through permits and through the green cost share participants, we would have some knowledge. And Patrick or someone else would have to speak about how far that could be shared.
Katie, did you want to ask more?
I just wondered, many places and many different surveys, you could self-declare, you know, and then it's my decision whether I share it or not. But I wondered that early map in the presentation, if that was reflective of like something that we invest in. So we went as 100% as much as we could, but it's offset. We don't have it on our house. So it's the next county over. But we could self-declare if there was a way of navigating that with the city and utilities.
That's a good idea. We could even inspire some competition between, I don't know what, neighborhoods or something like that too.
Yeah. Zip.
John, it looks like John has a question too.
go ahead and read it yourself, John, or if you'd like, I could do so.
Yeah, sure thing. Here goes. I'm curious how a Minneapolis Green New Deal would connect with larger scale efforts, either at the state or the national level.
That's a good question. I tend to think, let's try to do something and not necessarily depend on everyone, but of course we're listening and trying to be informed by what's being proposed and done in other areas. How do you think it could connect? Are you imagining something, John, or?
You know, I brought that question in just as a member of an MN 350 group, but I guess if I were to imagine something, I think it'd be really cool if we could somehow join forces with other cities to show that, you know, such an effort is increasingly possible.
And I know that we would love to jump on different initiatives, high-speed rail or massive investments in clean energy, parts of that as a city government. I'm sure that we would get people lobbying for it and that. So that's a good idea. And something to keep in mind.
I could maybe raise another couple of ideas. We have some funding now from the federal government from this rescue package that has been put together. And so I think part of it is spending that kind of stimulus in a way that advances some of these priorities and creates the forward momentum that we've seen. I also think that there are these little partnerships that happen all the time. So Charles mentioned our work to say that HERC is not renewable. That was very much in partnership with the Sierra Club and with Frank Hornstein at the legislature. He pushed to get that adopted as part of the renewable energy standard bill. And so that's us just saying, like, way to go, Frank, let's get that done. So there are these partnerships between local and state and federal that happen all the time. The one other thing that came to mind is Stacy's work on creating, because it's not just our relationship with the state and the federal government, it's our relationship with other cities too. And how can we, you might not be hearing me anymore.
In the meantime, it looks like we've got more questions. I'm going to look at the chat to see if we.
I'm glad it didn't crash for everybody.
Oh, there you are.
Maybe leave my camera off for a minute.
So did you get to finish your comment, do you think, Robin?
To myself, I have no idea. Let's go to Marcus's question or comment.
Okay, I really just had a commentary on the ideas that were put forward when we were talking about aggregation of data and disaggregation thereafter. That is something that we should be fighting for in the PUC on the regular, ensuring that energy companies are getting us that data, because they don't need to give us individual people. And I've heard their arguments. I know that they want to claim the more granular you get down into the information, the more likely it is that people would gain the capacity to figure out some individual person's energy use. And that's mostly bunk. But beyond that, simple aggregated data and then disaggregated data by certain information tracks like demographic information and locational information can allow us the capability to effectively target programs that will help people save money and help us achieve our goals. And I understand that's not in the best interest of the utility companies, because it means we'll be more easily able to effectively rerun the energy system in a way that suits us rather than their profits. But the only reason we bother with them being monopoly concepts is because at one time, several decades, half a century ago, that was in our best interest. And I don't think that's the case anymore. And the sooner they figure that out, the sooner we'll actually get progress on what we want. So, all those things added into a comment saying we should definitely be pressuring them on the regular and in the PUC to get over that hurdle and move past that roadblock. And that should be a rubric for how we deal with them in the future on pretty much everything. I'll shut up now. Thanks, folks.
That's really a good point though, Marcus, and folks should know that we've been wrestling with the utility companies over that with our energy disclosure ordinance, where we want potential renters to be able to understand what kind of energy uses has been going on in the place they're going to rent. And they don't want to give you granular information about the one unit, and maybe they shouldn't, maybe there's a way to work around it and we're trying to find that, but you can tell that they would rather not give out any information. They're okay on the really big apartment buildings because then they just average it all out, and that you don't really know about your unit, but you know that in that building, here's your average cost. But for the a duplex or a triplex, single family home you're going to rent, they don't. We've been having a big challenge getting them to agree to how to do it. I think we could say that a bigger challenge from Excel than Centerpoint, but it's just one of the many, many things that often makes somebody who works in the city go, boy, I sure wish we had a municipal utility that we could just find out, because we sure can find out how much water somebody's used, and then we can decide if we're going to share or whatever, but we can at least get access to the information.
And Cam, may I make a quick anecdotal addition onto that?
Sure.
Just to let people know, that is a real thing that is worthwhile. I can speak from personal experience. I've lived in my apartment here for 20 years. And at a certain time, about 5 years in, my boss at my work had a friend who was offering an apartment. And I checked it out. It was great. It was within my price range. And if that man had not been willing to tell me that the heating of that apartment cost $80 a month in the winter, I might have been unable to maintain housing if I had taken up that apartment. It's the kind of thing people need to know. Thanks.
Great story.
I think the next comment was from Lee. Lee, would you like to say your comment out loud, or do you want somebody to read it? It's a question about the Clean Energy Partnership.
Oh yes, I made a comment down below, hoping that some of the rescue money could go to the green cost share so we can do small business solar. But my question is, some I didn't really hear talked about is, what are the next steps with the Minneapolis Clean Energy Partnership? As in, what are Excel and Centerpoint working on in collaboration with the city, rather than initiatives that Excel and Centerpoint are doing on their own and sharing with the city about, but aren't really partnership? Yeah, I was trying to see what's where the partnership has been.
I'm not sure what hat to wear, the diplomatic hat or the crotchety, we're not getting anywhere hat. You know, usually it's them trying to deal with us, wanting them to cooperate more and do something. So I'll tell you this, for me, it's felt more like the city's been leading on a lot of these initiatives and pushing them forward on them. And they're usually figuring out how they can minimize the possible negative impacts on them. We did make a commitment to work on inclusive financing together. And so they, I guess, have made commitments along the way, but maybe Stacy or Alice or somebody who's been more involved in all that can help share some of the struggles about this. Because, you know, inclusive financing especially requires somebody who's willing to put it on their bill so that they can be a participant in that way. We thought Centerpoint was going to be really happy to do that. But then through this whole process of where they have to submit plans to the PUC and everything, they came and told us that they didn't want to actually put it on their plan. This is maybe way too much inside baseball, but they blamed it on some executives in a faraway state who would get too upset. So they wanted us then to intercede and say the city would like to intercede to see if they could get it in there. And so it's really been a challenge. I think we've been better off probably having the partnership because there is an interest in making it look good among all parties, but I'm not sure how well it is beyond there. Does somebody else want to help balance out my perspective somewhat? Do we have any champions of the utility companies and the great work they've been doing here?
I don't know if I can balance your perspective, Cam, but just I think this specific insights I would say is that it is very clear just from the basic business model that they have that they are most accountable to their shareholders. That is the way that they make money is building more stuff. So until they can build more stuff, and that's evidenced in Excel's 15-year plan, trying to build a fracked gas plant, trying to extend coal to 2030, even though, and that's still shutting it down early, which they would like applause for, but we're hemorrhaging money from those coal plants every day that we keep them open, and that we could save $1 billion a year by shutting them down in 2025. So I think there's clear, I think my interpretation of the Clean Energy Partnership is that the folks who are in the room are not the decision makers. And until you get the decision makers to the table, which seems like most of the way to get their attention is to say municipalization, they're not bringing their bargain makers to the table. And so they're biding their time. The example with inclusive financing is that Excel has refused to partner, which we hope that maybe they will partner, to give their electric savings data. And CenterPoint would like to get the same return on investment from this deal that they get, which would essentially make it not a good thing for anyone participating, because it would be a higher rate of return than even the existing market rate loans that CEE has, which is 5%. So I think that there's just some really, I think figuring out what is the way that community members can really show up and get state decision makers to say, oh yeah, we represent the public as well, which is about the PUC, but it's also about the Department of Commerce. It's also about the MPCA. It's also about the Attorney General's office. So those folks are supposed to represent us in state proceedings, and we need them to come around to the table to actually represent what we are asking for and not just rely on the Public Utilities Commission.
And I don't know if everybody knows the history of all this, but it was when we did a campaign to municipalize that when we got their attention, and then it was pretty clear we probably weren't going to win that effort, even at the ballot box, because it takes an initiative. It would take an initiative. And also the way the state laws are set up, it would be very expensive for the city because we would have to buy back future lost profits. And that's a shorthand way to explain it. So we ended up with this partnership. But that becomes this question all the time is when should we move forward, or how can we move forward with some kind of municipalization? And there's pathways that I keep looking for. And then I think others keep wondering, when can we prove that the partnership isn't worth it and maybe do that again? And I don't know whether anybody, I mean, that was quite an investment to try that campaign, Minneapolis Energy Options. I'm sure some of you must remember that, right? So that will be pretty big. I actually think the idea of getting the city to buy some of their own energy production, whether it's solar gardens, own them and invest in them, district energy systems that we can also tiptoe and start municipalizing piece by piece along the way. Maybe they'll let us, we can own a pipe of something that gets something to some building somewhere or whatever. But I think it's a big effort. And that's not really necessarily the purpose of this, but I will also say the fact that we went through that campaign and the fact that we have the partnership will mean when we start walking in and saying, oh no, we really need this for our Minneapolis Green New Deal. And if we don't get this, or if you just don't stay out of the way, if you just don't object to us raising the franchise fee, it's going to end up, this is kind of jargon, it's too violent, but it could blow up the partnership. or we could go back to trying to municipalize. So there is we still are using that, and it is still right there in front of us when we're at the table in kind of a quiet way and somewhat effective. But I will tell you, much more effective if you think that the partnership isn't delivering enough. You just go ahead and let the government and the utility companies know, and that will keep us, I think, in a better position to get the utility companies to be more cooperative. And I don't want to paint them too much with a bad brush. I mean, they're such big entities. Some of the people want to do good. Some of the people are probably interested in transitioning to more clean energy and all of that. So there's a complicated dynamic. And I think, Alice, you're kind of right about who's in the room and who isn't. And I think there's a strategy to saying, oh, they weren't in the room. I went back and asked them and they said no. The mysterious person in Colorado or somewhere. So that's probably more than you wanted to hear. We've got more questions, I think, too.
Yes, let me see if I can find the next one. I think it was Leo. Leo, if you're still here, would you like to ask your question, or would you like me to ask it for you? In case he's not still here, his question was, any support, allies, or antagonists from the county, Met Council, or state competing interests?
I bet you there's a lot of allies that we could uncover who'd like some of this, but you have thoughts. Stacy, you're kind of an expert on all those other entities, aren't you? Patrick, there.
I'm
Sorry.
sorry. I was
My
grabbing
bad.
at dinner, so I didn't catch it.
We're wondering if there's allies or antagonists from the county, the Met Council, or the state for this kind of ideas.
I think we can find individual allies everywhere. So yeah, it's something that I'm willing to look into and talk with your office about if you like. Strategize around that. This is a great time to be talking at all levels of government with the stimulus opportunities that Robin had mentioned. And if we partner to make, you know, we can create more, I suppose, with us. We can make those dollars go further.
With the Met Council, there's potential they'd be interested in some kind of transit and what could they do, and if we could increase bus ridership or that kind of thing, that could be a really big piece of this. And potentially it could actually be something that a Green New Deal could do. And of course, I like to dream, but if we had some revenue that came in and then we said, oh, we have enough revenue, Met Council, will you give us a deal? We'd like to buy a bus pass for every Minneapolis resident. How, you know, what kind of deal can you cut for that? And all of a sudden, anybody who lived in Minneapolis could ride transit for free. And I suspect ridership would go up quite a bit, but that would be a pretty big stretch. Also, the Met Council does the sewers, so to speak. They have the water treatment. So they take the water after the city is done with it, and you are all done with it in your homes, and it has to go into the big pipes. And we had some antagonists there because there was a time there we were looking at using the heat from the sewers, which I believe Vancouver does and other locations do, to capture that. They weren't interested because we really wanted to capture it in the bigger pipes at a bigger time. And it just seems so bizarre and foreign to their engineers. And I didn't talk to them personally, but this is the story that I have from it. But they didn't, and there wasn't much benefit that they saw, and they didn't want to even mess with that. There was even a fear it would take so much heat out of it that then it wouldn't flow properly down into the treatment facility. And they, I don't know, it was, so there's a lot of people who look at these innovative ideas and it's nothing they've ever done before, and they become antagonists just because it's too different and it doesn't seem popular or even possible. So there's probably more there too, but we could move on to some other questions as well.
I was just going to add to that Hennepin County right now is putting together their climate action plan. And they would be, I think we have some great partners at the federal level, at the state is really digging in deep on what they can do with climate change. And I think getting the county on board with some of these programs that can have real investment in projects would really help us leverage a lot more work. So if anyone has connections there or talk to their representatives there, I think that'd be very helpful.
And I think most of our delegation to the legislature is in some way or other a real ally on the work that we have to do. So we've got Jamie Long, we've got Scott Dill and Frank Hornstein who have really been leading on these things for a long time. But really all of, I would say, our delegation to the legislature from Minneapolis is allied with this. I think we have antagonists who, especially the folks who control the Senate right now, who don't necessarily even believe that climate change is real and caused by humans and a thing we can do anything about. And so we're having to continue to deal with that. I think that we have a real champion in our Congresswoman, Ilhan Omar, at the federal level. Yeah, I think we've got a lot of folks on our side when we try to do something like this. The next question that we have is from Natanya, and I tried to answer it in the chat, so I don't know, Natanya, was that a good enough answer, or would you like to ask this as well out loud?
Yeah, I think that was a good enough answer. There was definitely in that link some pretty good stuff about kind of how the city in general made the green zone delineations, I guess. But I had the second part of my question, which was, do you have any plans for like ways to center and promote these zones in the Minneapolis GND? So like specific ways that people in these communities can be targeted for programs. Yeah, thank you.
And I think that's going to be key. And I think I alluded to that a little bit. We've already done it with whenever it seems like whenever the green cost share expands a little bit, or we're going to do more energy audits, is like, well, we're going to invest in the green zones first, and we're going to go there and look at that first, and make sure that all those homes get looked at first or worked on first. And so I think that's kind of the idea right now, partly because it's something that we've agreed to as a city, as a priority area. And when we declared the green zones, we weren't really clear on exactly what they were going to get out of it, but it allowed us then to, as we built more things like this, to say, oh, and then we're going to go and we're going to do that there. I think it could easily be a place where we go when there was job training opportunities and those kinds of things as well. So sort of some wealth building potentials. And maybe others have other ideas about that can weigh in, but I think it was a good question and something to prioritize.
I think Patrick did a good job talking about how we have used the green zones to incentivize things through the green cost share. I'll just add, we also, so when we've subsidized folks' home energy squad visits down to having them be free, that was something that we made available to folks who were below a certain income and or in the green zones. So every time that we do anything like this, I would say the question is raised, what in addition to what everybody gets are we going to make available to the folks in green zones?
And we also need more ideas too, how to focus resources to address the issue of equity. And I think there's another question that kind of comes up about that. And it's not necessarily we have all these answers to this Minneapolis Green New Deal. I hope you guys understand that. It's kind of a design build as we're going, but I think it's time that we package it better and we kind of get some of these things nailed down too, and get people excited.
The next question that I see is from Nikolai. And would you like to read your question, Nikolai?
Sure. My question was about job creation and making sure that that BIPOC and low-income communities have access to the jobs that are created. Although I I think Patrick did a good job of answering my question in the chat. So I guess maybe if other people have other things to expand on that, but if not, then you can go to another question.
I can just briefly say from the work on the solar side that I think like there's a lot that the city can do, and also that community groups or purchasers who are getting solar renewable energy or energy efficiency can do to say these are our requirements. You know, whoever is making the purchase, whether that's or setting the incentive, gets to say you need to have this much minority labor or this much. You know, you can create whatever criteria you want, just about within certain legal terms, and that's something that we've used as a co-op in terms of creating 50% minority hiring. But I think there's also a second step, which is that what we've seen is that there's more and more people of color getting access to green jobs, but it's often as like entry level, you know, last in, first out sort of positions. And so I think kind of the next stage of the work is how do you equip people of color to really have more authority and autonomy in the clean energy industry and in energy efficiency in these other sectors. And that really gets into how do you support, whether it's just business development, you know, POC owned business development, you know, or a lot of what I'm thinking about is like worker co-ops and things like that that create collective wealth at a collective level.
We really need to do some work with the unions too, I think, in terms of training, especially as you go up and you need more certification and get through apprenticeships for some things.
It's a little bit unclear to me which of the things in the chat are requests to speak. I see something from you, Julie Kearns, and I wonder if you wanted to just say that out loud to us all.
Sure. Hi. I guess my specific interest and has been for a long time is source reduction. How do we prevent waste before it becomes waste? You know, because of issues like HERC burning garbage and that being the garbage that we're all producing and contributing. And a lot of it doesn't have to be garbage. And I guess the comment that I made is that I don't see any comprehensive efforts around source reduction as a strategy. And I think that's one that could be pretty easily socially mobilized. If my experience with people trying not to throw things away and reaching out to me to try and hand them off is any indication. I've heard murmurs of an actual reuse focused center getting launched in on the east side of St. Paul, and that seems like something we should be watching. But also, I guess the last time I checked in with Chris at 100%, you know, at the Clean Energy, Chris Connery, as we're kind of like talking about, I think it was we had 16 to 17 lobbyists at the state level working on clean energy, and no one working on waste in any organized way. And so I know there are pockets, but I guess that's just really an area that seems to have a lot of low hanging fruit, and I want to mention that. And at least make sure that it's on the radar. So thanks.
Thanks, Julie.
I think that's a really good point. I think we've actually pretty much not done much on our zero waste plan. So the city actually, especially with the last mayor, was very aggressive about this, and we did a lot and passed some rules and regulations. One of the big problems with waste too is that we don't really know how much waste we're producing. So we have a private hauling system that does all the commercial and all the big apartment buildings, and we aren't able to even get very good information from them. And everybody's afraid to try to organize the haulers again because it's so hard to organize the residential hauling in the 60s. And there's still nightmares, I guess, people have about that. But I think that's a good point. And coincidentally, we're getting our annual report on our zero waste plan tomorrow at the Public Works Committee. So we'll see where we're going with that and if we can get something going a little bit. I will tell you that as an elected official, we hear less about zero waste. It doesn't, I'm sure when there's bigger things going on that seem like they're more dramatic, and even climate change and clean energy isn't directly connected in a lot of people's minds to it. But the more people can even talk about it, so thanks for bringing it up, Julie, the more we can know that it's important and maybe keep taking it seriously. It's got a section in our climate action plan, and we've got strategies for doing it. And we even have a big zero waste plan, which involves some pretty big, heavy lifts that we haven't hardly started on yet. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
So we're at about 8, which is when we said that this was going to finish, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Any last questions, burning questions from someone? Or should we have Cam do a closing?
I had one, but if y'all want, I can wait. I mean, as in, it can go by the wayside.
No, we want it.
So we were talking earlier about green zones, and a couple of the other conversations in between have added to that concept for me. And we have established that green zones are something that we think are useful for equity, and that we need to maintain and ensure that we're doing most of our pilots in. So my next question becomes, when are we going to increase the number of green zones? One, because that would be the next step. As soon as we realize that they were a good thing, we should then make more of them so that there's more equity being transmitted throughout the city. And then second, some of the requirements that Timothy was putting forward in regards to hiring on these projects, we should add to the requirements of green zones those kinds of hiring requirements, because we've found in our own studies that the city has paid for that the biggest difficulty for people trying to get into the work that we bring forward in terms of BIPOC folks and folks in communities that are not usually advantaged by the work that we're bringing forward is transportation. And so if we're doing work in their community, ensuring and making sure that BIPOC, low income, and women and veterans in those areas are prioritized for employment, I think would be the next step for green zones. Is there any thought process or work towards getting any of that done, or what's the word, iteratively policy made in our sector?
Well, I think that it's been thought about, and I think it is a really good idea. And now, in terms of the next green zone, that we haven't had much discussion about. I think it's something that we could potentially look at. I'll have to tell you that getting the green zones ordinance passed was an incredible challenge. We were going to do one green zone to pilot it at first, but in order for me to cobble together the votes, and creating 2 made a whole lot of sense based on the measurements that we had too. But that, just for me to think of it from that perspective of the political sense about it, what would make sense. And then would it seem like it was pulling resources away from these 2 green zones too? I mean, really, theoretically, our whole city could probably be a green zone where there's all these investments and everybody. So, that's kind of the question. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Marcus. And it would be interesting to go back and look at the demographics and the measurements that we used and see where would there be a third green zone, and is there an area that is potentially as that would qualify as well as the first 2 that we have.
And also, that same analysis would help you determine if what you've been doing has been doing any work. Has it been accomplishing effective reductions, because something should give, given the original criteria. Should be, the original criteria were level of BIPOC population, level of pollution, and level of poverty. If we've done any good, then one of those should have ameliorated a little bit. Maybe
Yeah.
not yet, but possibly.
I'm not sure we've made that much progress at this point, but that would be really good to find out too.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
So
Well, I want to.
Yeah, go ahead, Cam.
Okay. I just want to thank everybody for being here, especially you presenters, not just for being here, but also for that amazing work that you're doing out in the community, and quite honestly have been doing to help the Ward 2 office and the city of Minneapolis, pushing these things forward and bringing them to fruition. There's actually been a pretty amazing partnership going on with community members and city staff in these efforts, and I think that those will continue. I hope you got a little bit excited about the potentials of what we could do if we could really maybe create those kind of resources to really make a difference, and that we have some potential tools to do that and build these programs out, these things that we talked about. I think we do. I think Minneapolis could easily be a leader if we aren't already a leader in the state, but even a leader in the country about what we could do. We are going to have some really big challenges, and there'll be opposition, I think, particularly with the fossil fuel industries and transportation. They're not really going to want to act like this is a problem or something Minneapolis can even take on. But we can, and we've proven it. I guess I will admit, we've done it a little bit on the lowdown. So the green cost share kind of just snuck up there. We separated the franchise fees and set aside money for sustainability over there. So these were like, and now I think if we bring them together and are more obvious about it and it works, we can make leaps and bounds forward. And maybe it's time that we do that. And we don't have to be so worried and embarrassed or ashamed of these little ideas out there. Let's be proud of it. Let's say we can do it. And let's say we can take on fossil fuel, and we can take on the gasoline industry, and people are going to have to start helping pay for the damage that they've done and correct it. But it's going to take some people power. So get excited, spread the word, and thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Green New Deal.
Woohoo.
Thanks, Cam. Thanks, everybody.
Right.
Good work, Arwood.
Good work to you.
Thanks. Hope that was okay.
I think it was great. Have a good one.